All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Inner Join. Today, I have Lindsay Murphy, who's the head of data from Hive. Excited to have her here. This is a show called The Inner Join, which is a live show that I dive deeper into topics of data management and data governance with an expert, and sponsored by Select Star, which is a modern data governance platform that provides data catalog, lineage, documentation, all automatically. So Lindsay, thanks so much for being here. It's kind of like we're getting very close to the holidays, so I'm very excited to end the year with you being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, glad we could get this in before the holidays.
Awesome. So to kick it off, I would love to learn a little bit more about you. If you can share a little bit about like your history and kind of like what you do today at Hive.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So I've been working in data for quite a few years. I think it's getting up to like 14 years now, which is a long time. I started my career actually as like a data coordinator, so entry level position way back in the day. Kind of fell into data after. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. What is data coordinator?
It was like an entry level title, I think, at the time. They just didn't know what to call it. It was you could kind of be like a junior data analyst, probably. So I was working with SQL and working with data, things like that. Yeah. So I kind of fell into that job after taking psychology in undergrad. And so I was focused a lot on like behavioral stats and doing analysis on research data and really small sample sizes. So I was very interested in data for a long time in undergrad, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then had this opportunity come up at a tech startup. So I learned a ton on the job in that first job. I still talk to a lot of people who I worked with at that company years later. And I think that really is what set me on my path and my career path. So I got very lucky in that sense. But learning SQL in my first job was definitely a blessing. I was able to take that through to many other roles. After that company, I moved into marketing agency companies for a long time. So I was a marketing analyst for a long time, learning about marketing strategy and doing analytics work there. And so I think that really kind of got me more interested in the strategic side of businesses. Like, how do you kind of understand what people are doing and how can you motivate them to do other things, and then use data to measure the outcome of those strategies. And then eventually after a few years, I got back into the tech startup world. So I joined back into tech startups and started kind of like starting data teams from 0 to 1. So I I was the first data hire at a company, Benchside, back in, I think it would have been like 2019. And so started the data team there, added some more people to the team, started to build out capabilities, and started to learn about the modern data stack and what that all meant. And so bringing in different tools, kind of sticking them all together to sort of build a data stack. And then from there, I kind of moved on to leading bigger data teams. So taking on teams that were already built and starting to learn more about best practices, using tools like DBT, data build tool, to start transforming and kind of maintaining your code, and doing like analytics engineering work is really when I started to get into that. And then I joined Hive in August. So I've only been here for a couple months. The company is super exciting, growing very, very quickly. Hive is a marketplace for pre-IPO stock trading. So if you are an accredited investor interested in buying stocks in companies before they go public, or if you are someone who works at a company, a startup, and you own shares in the company and you are interested in getting liquidity, you may be able to sell them on Hive. So very interesting industry. I didn't know much about it before I joined, and so I've been learning a ton. Super exciting place to work. And I will plug that I am hiring on the data team right now. So if there's anyone listening right now, we have an analytics engineering role open. So if you have used DBT for a couple of years and you're passionate about analytics, feel free to check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, a platform like Hive is not something that are like you see a lot on LinkedIn or news, but I think there are a few platforms out there, and I think it's a really great place, a great way for startup employees to get their shares be sold. So
yeah, for sure. Before joining, I had no idea that was a thing, and it's kind of like, there's so much value that employees can get out of that they can start to get liquidity out of their shares, because we know a lot of companies, they don't IPO for like 10, 15 years now. So if you're working at startups, you're kind of expecting those shares and those equity options to be value to you, but you may not see that value if you don't stick around for the long term, right? So it's it's a very interesting concept, but it's been exciting.
So today's topic that we're going to dive into, we called it building data teams that deliver business impact. I've seen you giving presentations around like the value of the data team versus like the cost of running the data team. So to start off on the like building data teams, building more effective data teams, I wanted to learn a little bit more about like your experience so far as head of data at Hive. You joined the company, I think, I don't know how big the company is today, but small data team, right?
Yeah.
So when you join an existing teams or existing data teams, what are the key attributes that you look for to kind of like, merge into, but also to grow for the bigger goals that you're being hired for?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I will say that I've worked at a lot of different startups now. And so I think over the past several years, I've kind of learned, what things to look for and sort of how, you never know what's going to happen, but I think you can start to learn what are the things to look for to determine whether or not, number one, you're going to be successful as a data person at a company. Because I think that a lot of times throughout my career, I've learned that sometimes there's a lot of extenuating external factors that don't have a lot to do with you as a leader, but actually have a lot to do with the business and how ready the business is to use data for decision making. And that has a big factor on whether you're going to be successful. So with Hive in particular, the things that really excited me about joining the company and especially the data team was that the founding team is very well balanced. They've all got a really unique set of skills and they know the market extremely well. So they have very good founder market fit. And I've worked at companies before where that's not the case, where the founders don't really know the market that they're working in. And I think that is a huge piece of whether the company is going to be successful and then as a factor of whether you'll be successful. So that was a big thing for me, was kind of having a lot of confidence in the founding team at Hive in particular. And then specifically the data team itself, reporting structures, I think, are a really big thing. So like, which person do you report up into? Which function of the business do you report into? At Hive, I report up into one of the founders, who is the chief platform technology officer. And so that really helps from a data perspective to kind of keep us close to the technology and the data. And so we have a much bigger focus than maybe I've had in the past on, the tech stack and actually ensuring that the tech stack makes sense, that we have a lot of high quality data and we're really close with the engineering team. Data quality and having data, the engineering team being data producers and the data team being consumers of that data in some cases. If you're farther apart or you're not close with the engineering team, then sometimes data quality suffers because of that. So those were two things that really excited me to join Hive in particular. And then the data team that we had a lot of the pieces there, a lot of the tools, but it was really coming in and kind of figuring out how do we sort of add more best practices to what we're doing, which is super exciting. I always kind of like to add those types of things and have a lot of exciting opportunities. For me as a data leader, like the environments that I try to build for my data teams is, having an environment where we can all learn together, where the field is constantly changing. There's no way that we can know everything. And there's a million different ways that you can do things. A data stack is like a fingerprint for a company. It's like everybody's data stack is so different because there's so many different tools and ways of doing things. So it's really just figuring out, what do we need in the business? How can we be most efficient as data people? And then just making sure that we have time to learn and optimize and resource the team appropriately for that.
All right. So yeah, it seems like a lot is obviously always to do with people, especially in a smaller company and environment. Did any of the like existing infrastructure or tooling matter to you?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that you can get the job done with most of the tools that are on the market now. But it's really just what are the things that are going to allow you to, it's kind of a balance, I think, between being really efficient and then also not spending a ton of money. So there's definitely tools out there that are more expensive than others, but sometimes you can make a trade-off of, maybe I want to spend more money in this area because it actually allows us to move faster. So it's not just always the cost and the bottom line. It's can I get more productivity and efficiency out of my team, which translates into more resources to use in other places. So we use Fivetran, DBT, Core, Snowflake, and right now we use Metabase. We're going to be moving over to, we just signed on with a new BI tool, Omni. So we'll be moving over to Omni soon. So, I mean, those are all, for all intents and purposes, they're wonderful tools. So I was excited to join a team that had those already in place. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it really depends on what you're doing more than the tools that you're using. But the tools do make the job a little bit more fun in the day-to-day.
Oh, awesome. And now you've also joined the companies as, I guess, the first data person, or to kind of spin up a data team, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And what is that like? What are kind of like the early days of challenges, and also what is it like to actually like set up the ground floor around operating and using more data with like a dedicated person like you, and also a dedicated team?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think I'm coming into Hive where there's already been something built, but I have been sort of that first data hire twice, as well as also coming into two situations where there was already a data team and process built out. So I think in the 0 to 1 situation, it is really driving a lot of buy-in, like getting buy-in to actually get, like, you do need tools to run a data stack. And at the end of the day, like, those tools are probably going to cost some kind of money or resource. So you need investment from senior leaders to be able to give you that budget. I learned in my first job that, you don't go out and ask for like a Porsche in your first business case. You, like, the first BI tool that I asked for in my very first role, I went from like nothing to Looker. I was like, can we get Looker? And it was like, $30,000 or whatever it was the quote back in the day. And so that amount of money, to ask for that amount of money when you haven't really shown any value yet, is kind of a joke. It's like, you're never going to get that buy-in. So my learning in that case, and what I have successfully done in future states, is you need to kind of work on the low-hanging fruit first. You need to kind of show, here's what we can do with just sticks and glue, put a couple things together, find the processes in the business that are extremely manual perhaps, and start to automate those with data. You can either do that, if you have a production database and you connect it directly to, hopefully it's a read replica, but if you connect that directly to something like an open source Metabase, or another tool that Google, or I guess it's called Looker Data Studio now, free BI tools where you can start to build some reports. You can start to automate things for people without doing a ton of extra work, and you can start to show a bit of value. When you start to get kind of that low-hanging fruit going and you're showing value, then you can start to ask for more things. And there's kind of an order that I would recommend that you want to go in. It's like, the first thing you're probably going to need is a warehouse. A warehouse, you can start out, you can probably throw it on a credit card at the beginning, and a warehouse doesn't need to be super expensive if you're careful of what data you're bringing in. And then you might want to look at adding tools like DBT, so you can start to build your transformation layer and your code base. And then you can start to add more things as you go. But it's really sort of this like slow climb, especially in startups that are very small and you may not get very big budgets for data. I think it also depends on the size of the company and what you need. So you don't need to do all those things like on day one. It's like you probably, maybe when you hit 40, 50 people is when you start to stand up a data warehouse and build those things. I think Tristan Handy actually wrote a blog post about this like way back in the day, probably 5 years ago now, sort of like the playbook of like, these are the steps that you would go through, and the size of the company and what you need to prioritize at different stages. But I think the main takeaway is really just like focusing on the company strategy. What are the things that the company doesn't know, and how can you use data to answer those questions? And then try to automate as much as you can of what people are already doing, because that's going to help show value very quickly. And then you can start to ask for more as you scale from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As a founder of a company, I get questions from other founders, or I guess more like a senior execs that are at like, let's say like 100%, 200% startups. And then they ask, hey, like we still don't have anybody in data. We don't have a data team. Should I hire, I want to either hire a data scientist, or should I hire like a manager? Because there's like pros and cons on both sides. There are specific things that we really want to do. Like, we've just done it without the data team so far. So we want someone to actually like do it, but at the same time, like we want someone to also drive the
Mm-hmm.
strategy around how we can leverage data better in the company. And
Yeah.
I think as someone who may join as a head of data, or someone who is joining as the first kind of like boots on the ground on the data role, it is important to be able to like kind of find those low hanging fruits or deliver value like upfront, and then but then not taking the eyes off from the road of where we're gonna go and how we're gonna scale
Mm-hmm.
overall, because otherwise it just is so easy to get bogged down with so many requests and
Yeah.
from a service desk.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, honestly, I think it's a great role for the first data hire is a great role for someone who's kind of reached that like senior point in a data role and they want to get to that next level. Like that's really what helped me get past I was senior analyst and then I was analytics manager, but I didn't really manage anyone. I didn't have a team. And this was really the opportunity for me to take on more and instead of just being the person who was doing everything. Now it was kind of like we had the vision, we had the pieces that we wanted to put in place, and then it was starting to build out a team. So yeah, I think it's a great role. I think my recommendation to people who are hiring data people is like your first data hire should never be a data scientist, in my opinion, because you're not ready for that. That's trying to like run or like speed walk before you've even crawled. And so if you don't have like a data warehouse, if you don't have clean data, if you don't have data pipelines built, your data scientist is just going to spend all their time doing that. And so, you want to build things that are modular, repeatable, maintainable as you go. And so I think, an analytics engineer or a data engineer can sometimes be a good first data hire, but somebody who kind of has the ability to sort of see the full data stack and be able to pull themselves out of the weeds and be able to say no to people too. It's like, as soon as you hire that first data person, everybody swarms onto them and is like, I'm so glad you're here. I have all these requests. And it's like, you kind of have to tell them to wait and you sort of have to share the vision of like, here's what we're building. We will get there. We will be able to service these things. But right now, if we take all of these requests that you have, we're just going to be a service team and we're not really going to we're not going to help the company elevate from a data-driven perspective.
Yeah, I mean that's a very I would say a rare talent for companies to find, and also on the other side, for candidates that might fit to that role, understanding if the company also can support that type of vision versus like they just need an analyst to give them answers.
Yeah, for sure.
But like I think the other part is like growing the team from there. Now tools do so much. There's a ton of ways that you can use AI to write SQL queries or answer questions. And a lot of tools are also embedding these functionalities within. So I guess if once you, let's say, have some of the things that are like built or basically is running within business, like who are kind of like what are kind of like the general milestone after for the data team? What are the types of hire that you would make after?
Yeah, so typically the way that I've kind of structured this, I guess this is the second time now that well, I guess that's the third time. So I kind of feel like the first sort of foundational layer that you need to get is sort of your platform team. So that'll be, potentially your data engineers, sort of depending on, do you want to be a buy versus build sort of data team? And I think a lot more data teams these days are buy, where instead of building all the tools, maintaining ETL connectors, all that type of stuff, you just sort of build what you need. It totally depends on what kind of data you're dealing with. Like I realize there's lots of companies out there who have mass amounts of data, and if they were to buy everything, it wouldn't be cost effective. And so they do have to build some pipelines. But if you lean a little bit more heavily on buying tools and potentially having teams that can focus a little bit more across the stack instead of just being like a really dedicated data engineer, for example, you'll get a lot more out of like a full stack data engineer, analytics engineer type of person to help you build that foundation. So that would be sourcing your data, potentially collecting more data that you don't have, storing it, moving it into a warehouse, transforming it for business purposes, and then starting to make it available for different use cases. And so I think that's typically going to be like your more engineering type of focused data people. Once you've got that sort of figured out, then that can service the business in a lot of ways because you can You can do a lot of like basic descriptive analysis with that type of stuff. You can deliver self-serve analytics and BI if you want to go down that route. And that is what helps you get a little bit out of this like ticket taking and more of, allowing the business to self-serve themselves in a governed way. And then I think building out like more of an insights and analytics team is something that kind of goes hand in hand, but that really can't come until you've got, your data pipelines built. Otherwise, your insights team is going to spend all their time cleaning data. So I kind of see like the evolution of the team as sort of being at least in those two different areas. And then you may even have, depending on your company, if you have a use case for it, you might have like a dedicated ML ops or AI focused team that's like a little bit more on the potentially like product delivery side. Again, it depends on the product and the company for sure. But I kind of think that, you need to have the foundation of the house in place before you can move on to some of those other roles.
Makes sense. So I guess a little bit more about like just managing teams in that case. What are some of the like challenges or obstacles that you saw from actually running a data team? So when this is like, I guess before the data team is very large, you have just the data team, everybody kind of reports to you, you're in charge of it. What are some of those that you didn't necessarily like expect before? A lot of people always say, oh yeah, like as a data team, we should say no, we should understand business value and understand the business context better. But are there anything particular from running a data team as a manager that you feel like wasn't necessarily like in the beginning something that wasn't obvious, but was, I guess, particular to managing data teams?
Yeah, I guess this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about like my background and coming from like a psychology background is that I've always approached data from more, I would say like not the softer side of things, or it's sort of like the more business strategy side of things. It's like, how is the business actually going to use data? And then in my mind, the technical skills are what you use to execute on that. I think a lot of what I see in both how people are running data teams now, and then also like how people are applying for data roles, is they like throw everything on the technical side first. It's like, okay, I can write SQL, I can write Python, I can do DBT, I can do all of these different tools. And I'm like, okay, great. You could have all the skills in the world, but if you don't know how to put them together, or you can't think critically about a data problem, or you can't, manage a stakeholder and figure out what is the question behind the question that they're really asking, then that you're not truly an effective data person. You could potentially do the work, but you're not going to be a great data person. And I think that goes into the individual, but it also comes into your teams and how you build your teams out. And so I think as I've learned, resourcing teams and starting to build teams out, you kind of need to figure out balancing out that team. I have a podcast that I do called Women Lead Data, and I have one episode right now which is not out yet, so you're getting a bit of a sneak preview. But Veronica Durgan from Saks, she's VP of Data at Saks, and we were chatting in the episode, and she was talking about like how to build a unicorn engineering team, and she was sort of talking like, we need to stop thinking about certain people being unicorns. Like that might be the case, but you can think of building your team out as a unicorn if you balance out different types of skill sets. And so you do want to have people who are very, very good at the soft skills, but also you need to have people who are really good at the technical skills. And that way they kind of balance each other out. But at the end of the day, I do think that the soft skills are still more important for data people than a lot of people give it credit to. So that's one thing. I guess that doesn't surprise me because I've kind of always felt that way, but it's just been more of a, I guess I'm always kind of like, oh, I wish people would like focus a little bit more on that as they're developing their skills instead of just on the technical side of things.
Yeah,
and then I think,
both hand in hand, both are quite important. But
sure.
One definitely gets more highlighted than.
And then the other big thing is like productivity and team process optimization. For me, those are like, I guess with all these different tools that you have in the data stack, it's like it's made everything so convenient to just like do that one specific thing. The problem is like trying to make things happen between these different tools. And so there's obviously other things out there like orchestration solutions and other things that can like help you connect all the dots. But it's really starts to like wear on team productivity and like processes when you've got all these different tools that you're working in. And so that's one thing that I think I'm continually trying to figure out how we solve is like, how do we make the day-to-day job as like barrier free as possible? It's like, we want things to be really easy so that people don't have to do all this context switching and like getting stuck when they're trying to do things. It's like, not only is it frustrating, but it's also just draining mentally for a team to be like, okay, I've got to go over here to do this one thing, and then I have to wait for my CI to finish or all these other things. So I think trying to make the workflow as efficient and like clean as possible is something that like I don't think a lot of data teams necessarily have figured out yet. And certainly I don't, but it's something that I think about a lot.
I see. Are you referring to more of the task, like a physical level task of, doing one thing in one tool versus another primarily, or is it also the kind of the knowledge and the context that those tools have that may not be shared with each other that you kind of have to, like, as a person, like bring the context of what you did from the other tool into the next one?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think the first part, like the individual task level thing, is just like trying to automate as much as you can. Like an example that I always give, which is probably a silly one, but it's like if you want to like lint your DBT code with SQL fluff or something like that, it's like don't make that a manual step that people have to remember to do. Like just automate that with a pre-commit hook or like put it into your CI check so that people don't forget that it has to be done. It's like if you want to do these things and then maintain it, you can't expect that your team is going to remember to do all this different stuff. It's like you just keep adding more and more things that they have to remember. It's like if you can automate as much of that as possible, it makes it super easy for the developer to just kind of like go and get their work done and then follow the requirements that you set out for them. But then definitely on the process side, like to be able to follow through a whole process of like, okay, maybe I need to go into Fivetran to sync some new data, and then I have to go into Snowflake, make sure it like landed the way that I want it to, and then I have to explore it and maybe a SQL IDE or something and do some EDA before I start modeling it in DBT. And then maybe I need to check the model, like my model in development and my BI tool before I push it into production and go back to GitHub. It's like all of these different things. It's a lot of context switching. And so I think being able to help teams as much as possible, and that may be through automation or by connecting information across different sources. But yeah, I think that kind of like that switching kind of starts to drain people, and then distractions come up and productivity starts to fall. So yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily a solved problem, but it is one that I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point. Like especially as someone who's making a tool, like integrations is just like something that just keeps popping up in my head as you're talking about this, because it is very true. And I think we've made this as an industry made a lot of progress on automating more things and kind of following software engineering best practices. There's still a ton of tooling and automation that's baked into software processes that I think is now also getting into data, and I think we should be able to see more in the future, hopefully. But especially between, let's say, checking if the data has landed correctly for the task that you're doing, and then also having that, like, I guess that available and being able to like browse and understand it within the BI tool. Like a lot of that, I think there's been a good amount of work that's been done. But I think there are also kind of that nitty gritty, detailed day-to-day works of engineers, data analytics engineers and analysts that can definitely be better. So great point. So we talked a lot about like teams and team management. I would love to dig a little bit more into delivering business value as a data team. What are some of the things that I mean, I think some of the things that you've already mentioned, like, understanding the business and mapping the data on how the business runs and the value from there. Like, I think being a kind of acting as a partner of a business stakeholders, I think comes in, both sides of the table. It's a data team that needs to have that interest and being able to like understand through how the business runs, but also for the business side to kind of like willingly onboard data teams. I guess like I've also like seen this aspect of, well, self-service analytics is letting the business teams to actually learn about data, and data literacy is another like topic. It is a topic in the industry that people care about. What's your point of view, kind of like in between those? I think of like in order for data teams to truly deliver value, there needs to be kind of like being on the same page with the business. At the same time, it's like there's a ton of work that team needs to deliver, and it's not like you will be exactly the same like level of details as the business either. So what are the aspects that you feel like the data team needs to like really lean on that you try to coach your team for? And are there any particular events or things that or tools that you've tried that you've seen making it more effective when you're trying to have position and have the data teams actually to work alongside the business?
Yeah, it's it's a very good question. It's a hard one to solve for sure. I think at the end of the day, like we talk a lot about the business needing to learn data literacy, but I think the data team also needs to learn business literacy. Like you need to understand how the business functions. And there's different ways to do that, right? Like if it's an industry that you've never worked in before, maybe ask spend some time with the CEO, ask the CEO to explain the industry to you if they're an expert in that field. But also go and do reading, like teach yourself about the industry and the history of it. And what are some of the key developments and problems and how does your business fit in that industry? How do you stack up against competitors? Like understanding all of those things are really important for you to be able to then speak the language of the business and understand where to spend your time, how to prioritize. A tool that I think is, or maybe a framework that I think is helpful is kind of metrics trees. And so at the end of the day, metrics are really what kind of help you understand how a business works. And a metrics tree is really the relationships between how metrics work. So if you, for example, plot revenue as your top North Star metric, or maybe it's profit, something like that, you can break down, okay, how does this company make profit? Well, it's revenue minus cost. And then how do we make revenue? And then you break your revenue down into, like for a SaaS business, it would be, monthly recurring revenue. Monthly recurring revenue is the number of subscribers times the average subscription value. And then you continue to like break it down into those component pieces. Once you have that whole thing kind of built out, you can use a metrics tree to understand when you're looking at data, if a number goes up, you can start to say, okay, well, this metric is related to these other metrics. Now I can start to look into those. And you sort of become this person who can actually understand the whole business on a single page. You can start to then circle parts of the business like, okay, marketing is responsible for the sign up area and the acquisition area and the retention and bringing people back. Whereas product might be responsible for like user churn and on more of product utilization, things like that. And then finance and different sales components of the business. So you can start to think about the departments of the business as responsible for areas. And they're able to pull those different levers of the business. So then when you go to have conversations with those stakeholders, you're much more educated and able to put it in kind of like an easy to understand framework for them. And then beyond that, I think it's just being more of a partner. So things that I've done is instead of waiting for people to come to us and ask for, I need this report, I need this dashboard, book regular recurring meetings with those leaders. I would book monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings with the head of marketing or the head of operations or head of product, something like that. And have the right people in the room so that you can start to understand, okay, what are your key priorities right now? What are the things that you can't answer? What are the questions that you have? And then your team is getting ahead of those projects and things that they're trying to work on, and you're helping them more as a partner, almost like a consultant in a way, instead of waiting for them to come to you and say, hey, pull this number for us or build this dashboard for us. And then you don't have any context or reason as to why they need that. Then it elevates you more. It helps you get ahead of projects more. And I think those are the types of things that help data teams get out of this like ticket taking mentality. And then the other thing I would mention, which is something that I picked up from Akia Obeys, she did a talk at Data Connect conference last year, where she talked about like, not all stakeholders are created equal, and thinking about stakeholders on an engagement matrix. And so you have, the interest in data along the x-axis, and on the y-axis, you have their power or their influence in the company. And so people, like people who are in the top quadrant, they're high interest, high power. Those are the people that you want to spend most of your time on. Those are the people who believe in data. They're able to actually like be a champion for you and influence other leaders. The worst people to spend time on are the ones who have very little influence, but very high interest in data, because they will keep you busy. But they may be just having busy work for you, right? And then the quadrant that you want to try to convert are the ones who have extremely high power and influence in the company, but they aren't interested in data, or they just don't understand it. They don't see why it's valuable. So those are kind of, I think it's helpful to sort of think about your stakeholders in that way, that not everybody is created equal. And when you have these incoming requests, someone may act like it's the most important thing in the world, but it's kind of like, it's important to them, but is it really important to the business? And if you're a centralized data team, especially, you can't action every single request. You need to be choosy about it. So
yeah, that's actually a good segue. What are some of the things that, if it was shared, or maybe you could just add your opinion too, ways to convert executives that does not have much interest in data, or believe that data is like inherently a place that needs to get an investment because he has or she has their report anyway, to be more interested in data?
that's a really good question. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how successful I've been at this in the past, to be honest with you. I've worked with leaders who had very high influence and power in the company, who were like really didn't believe in data, or they wanted to just like make the data say whatever they wanted it to say, and they didn't necessarily care about what it actually said. But someone did say to me once, it's like, you need to think about, is data the thing that drives someone, that they really believe in it, or is it something that they feel is potentially threatening? So is it something that's going to take away their power and their decision-making power because they want to just be able to tell people whatever they want, without having data influence the decision? So I think it's really, I think in those cases, and again, I haven't done this successfully, so I will say this is probably what I would attempt now, having more experience, is really spending more time with that person to understand, what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And how can I put data alongside of your decision-making process? I'm not trying to replace it. I'm trying to augment your decision-making process and like help you, so that it becomes more of a partnership rather than sort of like you as a data person being like, hey, look at all these things, especially with sales teams. It's like, if you show numbers before a sales leader has time to look at it, like they may find that kind of threatening, actually, because it might make them look bad, or it might show that they're not really achieving what they have set out to do. So I think those are the things where, hold your integrity. Don't fudge numbers for anybody. I think that's not a situation you ever want to be in. But I think at the same time, make sure that people are informed and that they haven't seen something before you were presented in a meeting, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The part that after I'm asking the question, that I actually thought about was also, most of the executives, they are interested in data, but not everyone may believe the amount of time and effort that goes into getting that data, or digging more into that data, is worth the investment, because usually it takes a very long time for them to, even just to get high level report. I think that, it's definitely changing, and is one of the reasons why there has been a lot of investment made into tooling to make that better. But I think that's like breaking down that like misconception. I think it is another like thing that data person can do to bring out an insight, or a part of a metric that you think might be interesting. I generally want, like, when people say, oh, go and just ask what they are looking for. That's, I think that if there is something that you can add about that topic, I think it makes the conversation go a lot better, because most of the time these people don't have as much time to train or teach you. It's better if you are equipped or prepared to have maybe a little bit more sort of similar line conversation with them.
Yeah, I think in those cases, I think it's good to even ask the question. It's like, what is the cost of being wrong? So if you make a decision without the information that potentially data could give you, what is the cost of the business? And so what is the opportunity cost potentially, or what is also the risk? And so if you do move ahead and you make a decision without having potentially critical information, is that going to be detrimental? Is that going to cause, lost revenue, or is that going to cause like potentially lost opportunities against your competitors? And if the answer to that question is no, that if it's like, it's not really that big of a deal, then I think it's totally, it's totally fine. But I think those are where you start to frame things in ways that executives think about things, is like, what is the actual total cost that this might cause us, and is it worth the investment? And then I think you can have more of a level-headed conversation about it, instead of being like, oh, these are all, we could build all these things, and you're focused more on the data itself and the insights that you deliver. It's like, bring it up like 7 levels and talk to them about the actual business and what the impact is going to be on the business. And just ask them those like hard questions, just get their feedback. Because I think in those cases too, like, you'll have your opinion as a data person, and it will probably always be, we should look at the data and we should invest in this because that's like your focus and your priority. But you can also have an opportunity for the executive to teach you something and be like, okay, well, this actually isn't that important to the business, and I can move on and focus our efforts in other places.
For sure. I'm also really glad that you brought up the topic of metrics tree. It's a term and like post that I've definitely read and seen before, but it's not something that I hear often. So I'm curious, like, where you've seen or implemented metrics tree, how, if there are things that help you with, or how to make that like real, if metrics tree is kind of like one of the more effective ways to share the data with and data I guess that's related to the business with everyone else in the organization.
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like metrics trees have kind of gotten a bit of a boom lately, like more interest and like excitement. It's kind of like one of the newer things that everybody started talking about in the data industry. But when I go back to my career, when I was back working at like marketing agencies, my manager back at one agency that I worked at was actually building us metrics trees back then. And so I was exposed to this like very early on in my career. He didn't call them metrics trees. I forget what we called them, like metrics measurement hierarchy, I think we called it at the time. But it was basically like, here's the objective of what this campaign or this company is trying to achieve. So it might be like, brand awareness or something. And then we would break brand awareness down into these like other component pieces. And we would try to see, okay, they're running all these different campaigns. They're looking at acquiring users, and we would kind of ladder those like really small component pieces up into this kind of hierarchy. And so I didn't realize at the time, but it's kind of the same concept. It was a little bit more focused on, just the marketing side of the business. But over the last few years, I think the next time that I got exposed to this was Evelyn Wainwright spoke at the Toronto Modern Data Stack. I think it was like one of our first meetups that we did. So I'm a co-organizer of the Toronto Modern Data Stack meetup. And she presented on metrics trees like probably 2.5 years ago. And I was kind of like, oh my goodness, it's so funny to see this like same concept coming again. But what she was showing it as was more of like a full business perspective. It's like, think about the entire business. And it's really giving you an opportunity to think of like, how does this business operate? How does this business grow and become successful? And you can kind of think of this, it's sort of like a thing that you can build for each company and sort of see your company on one page. And then she gave examples of other things that you can use. It becomes a piece of documentation, but you can also use it for forecasting. You can use it for targeting. You can use it for weekly metrics reviews, all kinds of different applicable use cases once you've built this out. And then I think Abby Sivasalam spoke about it at Data Council one year. And so I see more of this coming up. And now Count.co is a BI tool company that is a little bit like Miro, but you can start to Miro or like Figma or something like that, but you can actually build like dashboards and connect them. And so they have a really cool feat, like they're able to actually, you can build the metrics tree on there, but you can actually then plug the numbers in. So you can actually almost build like a dashboard as a metrics tree, which is quite cool. So yeah, I think seeing more and more of this and kind of, I think it's a good thing for data people to sort of educate themselves on, because it gives you a bit of a better sense. You almost operate your data team more like a growth team rather than just, here's the reporting. It's like you really become a fundamental asset to the business because you understand how everything sort of works together. And, if a certain segment of users, like signups go up, but maybe their engagement rate goes down, you can actually you kind of have an understanding of how the relationships between these metrics work. And it helps you to guide like insights, deep dives and analysis and things like that, rather than just looking into a bunch of stuff. You've kind of got a bit of like an analysis plan in your head from the get-go. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your original question, but yeah, I'm a big fan of metrics trees, and I highly recommend that anyone listening check them out if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the implementation of a metrics tree is done as a document.
Could be, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then some people do it in like implement it as a dashboard. And
Yeah.
fix it
You
up.
can also like put it into a spreadsheet, I would say, or like if it's in a dashboard, it could potentially manifest as a spreadsheet. But what it would essentially be is, you've got your top metric, your North Star metric, and then that would decompose into what's the calculation of that metric. So, like, for marketplaces, for example, revenue is typically a factor of the amount of transactions completed and the take rate. And then the amount of transactions completed is like, orders placed and then orders completed. The close rate, those types of things. So being able to sort of like break those down and understand your business, and then you can potentially translate that into, forecasting spreadsheets or targeting spreadsheets or a weekly metrics dashboard where you've got all those things kind of on the same dashboard. It just makes it much more actionable, and then people can kind of see, when something goes up and we know this is the denominator or another related metric, you can kind of see the relationship between those things.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I think this actually gives us a good segue into kind of data operations and governance. Like running a data team, like this is something that you have to implement and put it in so that it just doesn't go like, your work of making data more actionable doesn't just go everywhere. So yeah, what are some of the essential aspect or infra components that you feel like solid data foundation needs to have in a company, other than the kind of like the tools that we all use to get the jobs done? So if you were excluding databases or any DBMS or BI, like what are some of the things that are around there to make operations, governance, and management of data and for data team productivity that you believe are important?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot to that question for sure. I think so if I were to group it into like three categories, probably the first one is sort of having visibility of like what is everything that your data team has ownership over, and that can sometimes be really tough, right? It's like, you've got all these different tools and assets that are all connected together, but being able to see where everything is, how much of it there is, how much you have to maintain. There's kind of this concept that happens a lot of like it just starts to get like out of control. Like a DBT project can grow very quickly. You suddenly have hundreds of models and hundreds of tests, but it's hard to know, how many people are actually using these things. Where can I actually deprecate things? One practice that I think a lot of data teams don't follow is like a deprecation schedule of like looking at everything you have and seeing what are the things I can take away instead of just continuing to add more. So I think having some sort of capability to be able to see lineage from end to end, and maybe that's catalog, maybe it's integrations with all the different tools that you have, but DBT lineage is great. But if you can't see, maybe I have something failing in a source upstream, so I don't know if the source data is trustworthy, and then you don't know where any of your DBT models go. We have this problem right now because we use Metabase and DBT together, where if we change something in DBT, we don't have any way to know what we've broken in Metabase. And so it's like knowing where those connections are and those downstream dependencies is like very, very important. So kind of having an end-to-end view of your pipelines. And then I think, what were the other ones I was thinking of? I think like data governance and security. So more on the like understanding where sensitive data is, being able to kind of speak to those pieces, and being able to determine, who has access to what. Is this set up properly? Is this properly governed? Because that's more of the security side of your business. Being able to remove sensitive data if somebody has like, a request to remove or forget, right to be forgotten, those types of things. So having an ability to control those things in a centralized way and making that consistent across the business is also quite important from a data security perspective. And then the last one is probably more, I think we're seeing more things crop up like about this now, but it's really like more data about the data team. So it's like data about your data stack. So it would be, how much are you spending across all of your tools? Is that increasing exponentially because of something you've done? Or what is the pattern of like why you're spending more in Snowflake and Fivetran and all these other things? So typically like the kind of the data cost will flow downhill. The more data you bring into the system, the more flows downstream, and that's going to continue to increase your costs. And then also, the more users you get on your platform, things like that, that's going to drive costs up as well. So cost is one piece, but then it's also the performance of the whole system. So we're seeing more tools like Elementary is one for DBT, where like it monitors the DBT pipelines, it monitors how long it takes to run your DBT models and your DAG. If you have repeated test failures, maybe the tests need to be adjusted or thought of. And so it's really more about the efficiency and the productivity of your data stack and your infrastructure. And so that some of that might seem like very meta, but I think it's helpful, because otherwise you kind of just, you sort of just build this thing and you don't really have any information or insights about it. So it's hard to kind of maintain and scale that without having visibility into some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at Select Star as a data catalog and like lineage, these are kind of like the table stakes features that we see it as. But one of the things that we really focus on is usage analytics. So if it's really not being utilized downstream, like, regardless of the cost, it is contributing to confusion within the data team and any of the end users. But like if you were to also apply what the cost looks like, then it is also a really great insight to have, so that that like certain part of the pipeline or certain parts of how the data assets or data models get created is a part that you want to optimize for. So yeah, I think those all 3 points are really important. So thanks for sharing that. I see that we have a question here. We covered this a little bit earlier, but we have a question from Maxi, who was wondering about what are the areas that that he should focus on if they're looking to grow the data team to deliver business impact. You've definitely mentioned a number of aspects about the people that are that have a good soft skills and being able to learn more about the business aspect rather than just the technical skills. Are there anything that else that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, I see this person followed up with with a bit more context, that they're like a one-person data team. And so they're very small. So I think that is important to think about as well, is I think it's very easy to get caught in this trap of like, you have to answer every single question that people submit to you. I think I would recommend like getting as close as you can to your leadership team and helping them to say like, what are the most important problems in this business? Potentially trying to do the metrics tree exercise. One thing I didn't mention about the metrics tree is like, you shouldn't do that on your own. You can take a stab at it, but then you want to get feedback from the business and get them to like poke holes in it and give feedback and contribute to it, because they're going to know the business better than you. But if you do something like that, and then you have that sort of, what are the key issues in this business that we need to focus on? Then it becomes a top-down prioritization of where the data team should spend your time. And then it's very easy to say no to all these other things that, people are saying, oh, this is so important, I need this report. You're like, well, our churn rate is like 25%. And that's actually the most important problem in the business right now that we need to be figuring out. And so it's like, you kind of attack that issue with the business rather than trying to spread yourself too thin across all of these different areas. It's really kind of identifying what are the most important issues across the business that the data team can actually support with, and focusing on those things first. And so I think that comes with, understanding the business, building relationships with the leaders in the business, and then helping using their help where possible to push back. In some cases, it helps to pit leaders against each other. So if you've got two people asking you for things and they're both very important people, you go back to them and you say, hey, you're both asking me for this. I only have time to do one of these things in the next X amount of time. You guys decide, and then have them come back to you.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. One more thing that I would probably add to this is, I think one of the parts that are important in this case, especially when the data team is smaller, is to provide visibility to the whoever that you're reporting to or everyone else, like what you're actually working on. So whether that is like your Jira board or whatever the task management system, so that they know that you're busy with doing this marketing analysis or finance, so on and so forth. And I think this is also could be an area where different tooling can really help, so that you're not necessarily like as a person managing the process. You're leaving it for everyone to follow the process through the tool. And if people still have issues, then that's really a great places for you to like say these are the types of people that we need more to grow the team. But I think for growing the team itself, I think you mentioned about like bringing on like more business focused analytics person on the team. Is that right?
Yeah, I think eventually, like that, like definitely at some point, it's good to have someone like that in the business because otherwise, what ends up happening is you end up with a lot of people who don't really have a stats background or have a little bit of experience in data and an interest, but like they will do analyses that actually like probably don't make sense or aren't statistically accurate. So I do think like having that type of person eventually is good, but you kind of want to make sure that you've built some assets for them to use. Otherwise, they're going to become another person that now you are trying to answer requests for, right? Because they're not going to have access to the information they need to do their job. So yeah, it's definitely tough being like a one person show for sure. So I think it's like building as many things as you can that deliver value that are very like versatile. So data modeling would be a good example, so that people can answer their own questions, their own basic questions, and then you spend your time on like the highest impact stuff, and then eventually, hiring that business analyst to answer some of those more in-depth questions that require a bit more analysis.
For sure. Thanks, Lindsay. So I realized that we're kind of like less than 5 minutes left. I wanted to kind of dive into more of like looking into 2025 and looking back at 2024. What are some of the things that in the industry in 2024 that you kind of like feel like you're more impacted about, excited about, things that kind of got you thinking? And are there anything that you're looking forward to or anything that you are predicting for next year?
Yeah, I think I mean looking back at 2024, it's hard to not for data people to not think about like AI and talk about AI. Like that's the thing that keeps coming up. It's like, where are you going to use AI in your workflow, and like, how are you going to enable your company to use AI? I think honestly it's gotten a little bit annoying. It's like there's AI in every single data tool now, and it's like varying degrees of usefulness and effectiveness and security. And so I'm kind of excited to move into the next year in the hope that it's like these things will start to transition out of this like crazy hype mania phase into like, okay, how do we actually get value out of these things? And I don't know that we've totally figured that out yet. So I think we'll hopefully see a little bit less of this, like, slap an AI and just every single thing on the face of the planet because you have to, because I don't think it delivers a ton of value. So I'm kind of hoping that that we walk away from that in 2024. So maybe that's not what I'm excited about, but I am excited about that potentially becoming a little bit more useful and applicable. And then I think into 2025, like obviously that's a bit of a harder one to answer. There's so much going on. I have only been involved in like some of the conversations and discussions about this, but I'm interested to see some of these kind of like paradigm shifts. Like I think a lot of what we're seeing happen with like Iceberg and all these other like storage changes where maybe we don't have to move data around so much and we can just query it in place. That's going to change so much to do with like how we work and whether or not pipelines are updated on time, and if you're doing batch orchestration still, like I think it'll just make things easier and cheaper. So I'm interested to see where that goes for sure. And then also another maybe more like a broad trend is probably this like consolidation that has already started to happen in some places where like, tool like Snowflake and other big players like buy other tools and just sort of bring that in, or like Snowflake's building native apps and those types of things. So I think seeing more of these tools that like do more than one thing, I think it's a double-edged sword, because then you end up being stuck in this like one world where you've invested all of your time and effort into that place, and then it's hard to switch if you want to. So yeah, it'll be interesting, but I'm sure lots will happen next year that we can't predict now. So
Yeah, for sure. Is there any like your personal like use cases of AI in with data or that you've seen that you actually thought was effective or cool in this past year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like the most simple things are like things like GitHub Copilot, like that. I use that every day, and it's like it really it helps speed up my work. So those are like the minutia things that I think are super valuable. It can also be totally wrong, and sometimes you have to be very careful when you're using it. But it speeds things up so much, and it just like makes a lot of that like tedious work a lot faster. So those are like super small things. I think those are really the areas in my work, at least, that I've seen a difference. And then it's just more of the, like, I use ChatGPT and Claude and things like that for brainstorming, with varying degrees of success. Sometimes I think it removes creativity, and thinking and like thinking about the problem a little bit more, but it helps a lot sometimes to like get you organized and keep you on track if you're using it as like a personal assistant, those types of things. But yeah, I think more broad AI stuff like that, I haven't really seen much that I would say is doing a lot for the business more broadly. But yeah, we're a highly regulated business at Hive, so we're not really that focused in AI.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I've heard from our users that I didn't expect before is that like a lot of people use our AI to generate SQL queries. But in particular, a lot of people also ask, especially analysts, they ask our AI this question: how do I join table X and Y? Because there's no easy way to join them. You have to use a different table in between, or they both have a lot of like columns, for example. And I thought that was like a very interesting use case. It was like always kind of one of the feature requests that we've had before, but now our AI takes care of it. So like I'm hoping to see more of those like like value add right away type of use cases that where AI can be used in the future. Well.
Yeah, I like that, where it's like, it's a very like guided solution. It's like, this is a very specific question instead of just like an open-ended question, because then it can just go on and do, I think the hallucination factor becomes a much higher risk when it's much more open-ended. But I do like seeing tools where, this is a very specific thing that it does, and it gives a good answer to that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today. Really excited to have you. If you haven't already, Lindsay also runs a podcast called Women Lead Data, where she brings a lot of amazing women data leaders onto her show. So please check that out. And otherwise, happy holidays. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you later.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.